Chapter 1. The sea pounded against a lumpy boulder, throwing up a heavy spray of water which still didn't look right to me. With a tongue click and a swipe of my brush, I bumped the red value 2 points in the nearest droplet and stepped back from the projector. The holoscope sculpt projected exactly what I had painted, and perhaps that was the problem. A froth of white draped limply over the dark blues and grays of the ocean waves. The rock in the foreground just sat there. The clouds above appeared bored. I flung my brush through the projection. The seascape wasn't made any worse by the smears of color left in the wake of the flying sensor tip. A red light flickered at the edge of my peripheral vision. "Activate," I whispered, and flicked my eyes down and to the right to examine my dashboard. The glowing figures projected by my monitor indicated 6 messages had come through since I shut the monitor off. I was late for my coffee date, and my blood pressure was 10 points higher than it should be. First things first. I closed my eyes, took 2 deep breaths that encouraged my racing heart to slow and the blood vessels in my extremities to relax. A pleasant vibration behind my right ear indicated my blood pressure had normalized. I grabbed my bag as I muttered at the monitor, "Tell me, are all the messages from Evie?" A green dot lit on my dashboard. "Okay," I said, walking to the front door. "Message Evie and say I'll be there in 15. The dot flashed twice and went out. I stepped outside, hoping Dad would be in the front yard, and looked around the property. A screen of trees intermixed with bushes obscured the house from the bike path, which was our only access to the podway. Between the trees and house, squares of waist-high grass interspersed with squares of flower beds. No Dad in sight. "Monitor off," I said in a normal voice. A numeral 3 appeared on my dashboard, and the monitor disappeared from my peripheral vision. I began prowling the yard, hoping Dad would be somewhere near, and feeling more pressured to find him quickly than I knew was healthy. My irritation grew when I didn't find him in front. I went around to the south side and searched the rows of apple trees in the orchard. Apples hung low from every branch. Although still a little green, they were growing nicely. A flock of red-winged blackbirds broke from the grass ahead of me, and I startled and whipped around at a tap on my shoulder. Dad stood there, frowning down at me. "Pattern recognition," he said. "Yeah," I snapped back, "I know. I walked right past you and didn't see you, and I should have. Look, I'm late for coffee, I'm irritated, and I'm pissed." "Ooh," Dad said and took a step back. "Irritated and pissed?" I laughed at my solid, muscular dad's imitation of cowering before me. "So why the pissed-off irritation, Alishel?" "I destroyed my seascape just now." My statement triggered the emotion I had been holding at bay, and tears came swimming into my vision. "Why did you do that?" "Because it was no good. It didn't do what I wanted it to. It just kind of sat there. Even after the animation, it wasn't alive." "Alishel." Dad put one of his thick-fingered, calloused hands on my shoulder with feather-light weight. "You've got talent, my love. You're just young. You need more—" "Right," I said. "I know. I'm young. I need practice. I need experience. I need. But what I want is good art now." My voice rose, and I noted the sudden silence of the birds around us, even as my father's eyebrows went up. I scuffed a weed with my toe. I'm sorry, and I'm late too. And we could have had this entire conversation while I was biking if you'd just get a damn monitor like everyone else." "Yes, right," Dad said. "Was that the source of the pissed off or of the irritation?" His effort at humor paid off, and I smiled at him. "Oh, now let me think. I believe the seascape pissed me off and your intransigence was irritating." "Very good language usage. Now get your bike and go." I spun for the house, hesitated, spun back, and placed a quick peck on his cheek. "Love you, Dad." I turned my monitor back on as I pedaled hell-bent down the path. Call a pod to the intersection of Home Path and 34C. The monitor flashed green at me and began a countdown clock to the pod's arrival. Good. I timed it perfectly. I slammed the bike into the rack just as the pod wheeled up. The pod seat formed to my backside, and I caught my breath before we even turned onto the main podway and joined up with a train heading into town. Evie and Demby were waiting for me under the awning of the coffee shop. Effie frowned when she spotted me, and Demby reached over and pressed his hand to her jiggling knee. Effie's impatience rubbed against the raw spot on my psyche left by my artistic failure, and I sighed. "Did you not even listen to my messages?" Effie lifted a strand of her curly hair and shoved it toward my face. "We were supposed to match." I made a face at her. "It's Platinum Week. So sorry I didn't have time, but I was busy completely screwing up something important." She pouted and dropped the curl. "Your holoscope didn't turn out?" "No." Demby removed his hand from Effie's leg and put it on my arm, and his elegant fingers putting gentle pressure on my bicep. "What is it?" I asked. He leaned forward, his platinum hair contrasting oddly with his brown-black irises. "Not here," he whispered. "Are you crying?" Effie asked. "Not here," he repeated and swiped at his eyes. Effie jumped to her feet, bumping the table in her rush to go. My hand darted out to steady the table. She glared at me, then turned to Demby. "If not here, where?" "Let's walk to the park," he said, and unfolded his lanky frame, as always making me feel short despite my greater-than-average height. Effie swung her compact frame into motion, driven, as usual, by great internal energy. Demby and I followed, our longer strides making up for her head start. A block from the park, Effie could no longer handle the silence of my brooding and Demby's apparent stress. "So what?" she asked. "What's the big deal?" "I found something," Demby said. "I was hacking, and I guess I hacked into the wrong place." "Oh my God," Effie breathed. "Did you get caught this time?" Demby waved his hand. "I doubt it. I'm too good for that. Besides, I'd already know if I had, wouldn't I?" "So, what did you find?" I asked. "Flash it to us." He shook his head, looking miserable. "I can't flash it. I won't." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't even trust our monitors with this one." Effie and I stopped walking. "What?" she screeched. "You don't—" Demby clamped a hand over her mouth. "Hush, no, just hush." He left his hand in place until Effie nodded. She started talking again as soon as he dropped his hand. "So how are you going to show it to us if you can't flash it?" He swung his satchel off his shoulder, looked around to spot the nearest camera, and turned his back to it. Effie and I crowded his shoulders to look at the actual piece of paper he pulled out. Effie saw it first, gasped, and stumbled back a step. At first I couldn't make out what the still shot portrayed. I saw bits and pieces, flashes of green and splashes of red. Whatever it was, it made my heart go still and my limbs freeze. After a moment, I realized my eyes had drifted away from the paper to the ground. I forced them back and saw the paper shaking. No, Demby's hands were shaking. If he could look, I could too. I studied the image this time with an artist's eye. The shot was framed by a riot of greens, the interlacing vegetation of jungle. Thick, white smoke rose from grass huts. Closer to the foreground, villagers lay in heaps on the ground. Women sprawled in bloody clumps, their limbs at strange angles. Black pools soaked their crumpled skirts. The tiny limbs of babies and young children poked out from beneath the women. In the foreground, 3 men hung by their feet from poles, their long black hair brushing the ground. The men's faces, their faces, I whirled around and vomited into a bush. Okay, and just a short section from Sage Courage. Again from the beginning. Chapter 1. Between building road weariness and constant glancing into the rearview mirror, Layla forgot to look at the gas gauge. The analog needle sat low in the orange mark when it did catch her eye. She looked around, more aware for a change of her surroundings than of the receding road in her mirrors. Fence posts, sagebrush near and far, the one standing tough and prickly and proud, the far ones nothing but gray-green dots on the prairie. To her left, an outcropping of red rock. Rolling prairie under an impossibly big sky. No side roads, no sign of civilization as far as she could see. And here in central Wyoming, she could see a long way. A new anxiety built itself on the bedrock of her constant nervous tension. Soon the car would start to choke, jerk, and stutter, and then she would be stranded with not a person in sight and not a single place to hide the car. Stu would find her. She wondered if, when her husband came for her, she would run. The thought made her legs rubbery. 3 stressful miles later, a modest green sign announced Elk Crossing in white letters with an arrow to the left. She turned, hoping this place wasn't far and furthermore had its own gas station. So many towns out here merited signs and then consisted of nothing but a few weather-beaten, boarded-up buildings. Pressure behind her eyes, a dry mouth, the rearview mirror, the gas gauge, the mirror, and then, like an oasis, a tall sign announcing a universal brand of gasoline came into view. She pulled up to the nearest island and popped her door open. The wind almost pulled it closed again, and her legs barely held her upright. The crumpled money which came out of her pocket amounted to $11.37. So Elk Crossing was it. No more play in her finances. Her stomach felt tight and small under her waistband. $4 of cardboard hoagie and $6 of gas later. Layla shifted from one size 8 shoe to the other at the cash register. She could hear Stu mocking her as she struggled to ask a desperate question of the teenage girl behind the counter. She firmed her trembling chin. Is there any work around here? For the first time in their interaction, the cashier's blue eyes met Layla's brown ones and actually focused on her. I don't think we're hiring, the girl said, flattening her hands on the counter between them. Layla noticed her blunt, square fingernails, the calm way the hands rested, fingers pointing across the counter. The stillness of the girl's hands somehow kept Layla from crying, although she wanted to. No, she took a deep breath. I'm looking for a job. Any kind. She glanced up, saw a fleeting wince of pity, looked back at the hands. You'll want to talk to Randy at the hardware store. Straight west into town. It's the one with the flags on the right. You can't miss it. Thank you, Layla managed, and fled.